Hey guys, Budcat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, May 20th, 2021, and I want to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. All right, guys, well, we're going to continue with part two in my series looking into the accounts of the quote unquote giants, or large hominids, as I like to call them international, and in this video we're going to cover Japan, and it seems only fitting. Last video I covered China, so yes, there are more giant skeletal remains to be found in Japan, as it is all over this planet. And we're not done yet, folks. We got plenty left to go, so stay tuned. So what do we know about Japan? Well, it's very interesting to me that we find these extreme megaliths in Japan. And what are these things, and who's making these things, and what can you really do with them? I mean, you're going to transport them somewhere, or why would they be one piece and all that kind of stuff if you weren't doing something like that? Just make a statue. It doesn't have to be disconnected from the piece of bedrock that it's in, but it was, and why would that be? It's interesting to me that they call this Japan's. This article is, I'm sure it's a very interesting article about Japan's ancient megaliths and uparts. Okay, and I've been calling these things like the Rio-Bec style Mayan temples down there in Central America. Um, Actually, oop arcs, like out of place architecture. And I did a video about out of place architecture on my channel just to put that idea around. You don't have to talk only about oop arts, but you have this out of place architecture to go along with the oop arts. So that's a little thing that I came up with because it just seems so. Some of the architecture that you see from around the world in various places seems so out of place, more advanced, more precise, so more a bit of engineering in some of these things. So this truly is out of place architecture, and these megalithic um, things here in Japan are just phenomenal. What are they? And who's moving these things around, and what was the intention? You see, so something interesting to think about. And also with the Ainu in Japan, the indigenous people that were in Japan before what we know as the Japanese got there. And it's just, here's another recurring theme. And this this video is about these recurring themes, and you have to question it because it seems to be happening again and again and again and again. There's, whereas mainstream would chalk it up as some sort of coincidence or something like that, or just people have the same archetype in their heads or whatever it might be. It seems, it's a difference between possibilities and probabilities. It seems highly improbable that people would come up with these ideas independently that had no connection to each other, and they seem so pointless in the long run in the whole scheme of things, not useful in any way. The peoples in the past have a tendency to do only useful things, not very frivolous things, despite the decadent societies of the past. They had a certain level of order and practicality in mind. Not everything was pomp and circumstance and just for the hell of it. So you have to think about these things. So what is the recurring theme here? Well, it's, people being displaced, indigenous people being displaced by some other outsiders coming in. It seems to be that happening all over the planet in the past, where people was known as us, are commonly known as our sort of people. These Ainu people are very different if you don't know anything about them. I've discussed it before on this channel, but these people before. But if you don't know anything about them, you should look into them because they're very different than what we would think of as Japanese. Is all these people, whether it be Japan or Egypt or United States, whatever, they have their history, which they're very proud of, but it only goes, the history that they're proud of is the one that concerns only them. And it doesn't have anything to do with these indigenous people. And suddenly they're given praise in textbooks or whatever, and treated in a very different way, So, these people are all proud of their countries, but, they weren't the first people who were there. It seems kind of odd and immoral in some way, because you had these people who had their lives in their societies in these places and were displaced by these invaders, basically, and all's fair in love and war, all nonsense, that's sort of barbaric way of looking at any intelligent problem. But that's interesting to note there as well. This is a recurring theme from around the planet. All these ancient sites around the planet was seen to be occupied by people totally different from the people that we know historically to come from these areas, were only secondary there, peoples to being there, you know? So just interesting to think about. And, we'll talk about more about recurring themes as we go through these accounts because this seems to be what's happening again and again. Similar to this first one, we're going to look at the giant sword of the samurai. And Chris Leslie discusses it in this little piece here on his site here, Greater Ancestors Museum. And so let's look at this thing. It's just absolutely huge. And, who is it for? Why is it for? Why are people doing things that they don't have to do? And for no particular reason, just for shits and giggles. The giant sword of the samurai. This giant sword was made by Asafune Norimitsu in 1447. It was forged as one piece. The sword is owned by the Kibitsu Shrine in Okayama Prefecture. The blade was covered in rust before Okasato polished in 1992. The giant sword is 12.5 feet long, 3.8 meters, the body being 7.5 feet, 2.3 meters, and the Nakago 5 feet, 150. I guess it's meter, I guess, it can't be meter, but in any case, it weighs about 31 pounds, 15.47249 ounce, 14.5 kilograms. The longest Nahanto Japanese blade. This Odachi, called Norimitsu Odachi, is 377 centimeters long and weighs 14.5 kilograms, which is absolutely huge. And who is swinging this thing around? Who would have used such a massive sword? What was the size of the samurai who used this sword for battle? Think how awesome it would have been if it was wielded by some huge 8-10 foot samurai. And legend around a nearby town is that you slay the giant, you get to keep his sword as proof. So legends of giants, another recurring theme. These giant weapons that'll probably be proclaimed to be merely votive by academics, which, is highly suspect in my opinion, because all these disparate societies have this recurring again and again. You have pockets of rather large people existing today in contemporary times in various places around the world who could, if they were maybe even a little bit taller or whatever, wield these weapons with no problem. Okay? Probably hybrids that, somehow are keeping their segment of DNA that most concerns their people by not interbreeding. Similar to that, to the Watusi, the chiefs of the Fiji Islands, and the Frisians there in North Holland in Germany. These more recurring themes: large weapons that are, they're going to say is votive. But is that probable? I think it's highly improbable that this would recur again and again in disparate societies that had no contact with each other. Commonplace giant swords. The largest swords come from this time period. There were giant weapons and armor from Japan. Through Europe, giant swords, helmets, and giant suits of armor come from medieval times, each having tales of great heroes of extraordinary size and power, which we've covered several times in these accounts of the giants, the Frisian giants again. We're talking about the giants living up into contemporary times. Some of the bigger ones, I think, going back, maybe 100 or 200 years ago, and they just totally have, disappeared. Other than these people that I just mentioned, all right, and there were probably more pockets of them living around the planet, including Japan. And I'm sure if somebody did a comprehensive study of these things and try to trace these things back and locate the areas where these rather large people live, they would come up with something. But they don't want to do that because it's only going to confirm the things that they don't want confirmed, especially since science is so anti-religion. And this is not possible. Although there seem to be like split personality. They believe in the giants when they dig up all these things and find these rather large skeletal remains. The ones that they don't classify as suffering from gigantism and acromegaly, which is preposterous, clearly preposterous in so many instances since it's so rare and populations were so low in the past. So, you're looking at these recurring themes, but just keep thinking about it because you're going to see it repeated again and again with these accounts. This very unwieldable sword is from one of the most neotenous, childlike, or young looking in comparison races, the Asian races. So, one of the smallest races will be said by skeptics that this sword is wieldable by the Japanese. Then they will say there are very tall people today. What they will not say is that today the Japanese are tall because of KFC and McDonald's and other modernizations bringing beef and chicken loaded with steroids that previous generations didn't have access to. Well, yes and no, and it could be that only within the last couple hundred years, these giant races and pockets of these giant peoples from around the planet integrated with people of average size like us. It seems to be that way to me because of the reports of the Europeans who were traditionally on the short side, seem to be among the tallest peoples in the world in 1800, only the ones people of European descent in North America for some reason, and that the Plains Indians were also among the tallest peoples in the world at that time. And then what happened? It seems that this integration of the last vestiges of the giants occurred within the last 200 years or 300 years, maybe all part of this, history that's hidden from us that we don't know anything about, that the history is not what we are told it is, and for reasons they don't want us to know about, and somebody knows about it, and who knows, maybe these non-human entities, which I find fascinating, is talked about in these articles here by Chris Leslie. Truth be told, the Japanese are still a short people, and people around the world would be much shorter if they didn't have this diet of height-enhancing food, giving a false positive. The point is that this giant sword is only wieldable by a giant, and giant swords do not need a soiree party, or ceremony to explain away its function and ownership. Yes, that's right. They are always trying to explain away these things, and their arguments are specious, they're fallacious as well. It's not true because ha ha ha, and all of this sort of thing, which are fallacious arguments. It's not, you can't just laugh it off and everything else. What they know about the past, and I've gone over on this channel, is nothing but hypothesis and theories. Nobody knows. All they can do is piece these things together in a way that they come up with in their own minds a complete fantasy of their own making, and then others build on this fantasy once they hear this fantasy story, and the fantasy story is perpetuated, and that's not what happened. You see, that's what you learn in school, a fantasy story about the past. Okay, not only told by the winners, but the people who want to believe in things that they feel should be told without any real supporting evidence. When you look at these things closely, it's mostly hypothesis and theory for many things, and they keep changing their mind over and over again. Not that they shouldn't, based on new evidences and stuff, but they seem that every time they come to some conclusions that that's the end of it, and there's nothing further open to discussion, which is rather unscientific. Great height, early Japanese, and this is just a headline. I wish we could see the article, but even just the headline here, you can only imagine what the article might be about. But Stone Age skeletons, bones of early Japanese show their great height. Okay, so I don't. It's not referring to when or where this is from or anything, but this is the only thing they could get. It's probably very difficult to do this research. You're gonna look at microfiche in every township throughout. Every one of these countries or your own countries for reports from the past 100 years ago or plus or whatever. It's going to be rather difficult, and give a lot of credit to these people who find these things have done a lot of work, I'm sure. But that's all it is this headline. But we'll get to more substantial ones like this one. Japanese 8-foot mummy. So again, mummification. Here's another recurring theme over and over again: mummification from the past. It wasn't only done in Egypt, it seems to be done all over the planet during these time periods and thousands of years ago by their baloney timeline, where some places are old. They don't know the age of these. It's just all approximate things based on crummy science, whether it be radiocarbon dating, these other methods that they use in Cornell University found them to all have tremendous faults in all of them. So can't trust any of that stuff, folks. Okay, no History Channel or high school textbook history or whatever it is. All that stuff is garbage, complete garbage and nonsense, and fantasy stories made up by academics who oversee these things on state to state basis and national basis, whether it's the federal government or the state government with their sticky hands in there adjusting history for our consumption. Giant mummy in Japan. One of the most interesting exhibits at the Aisho exposition held at Tokyo was a giant mummy enclosed in a large square coffin. The figure measured about 8 feet in height. This relic was obtained by a Japanese explorer at a Buddhist temple in the province of Kiangsi. Experts support the claim that the mummy is that of a famous monk who lived at the beginning of the Christian era. So this report was from the Bourbon News in Kentucky there in 1914. And I guess it's on a history of the Bourbon News there in Kentucky. So this is a report in American press there. And let's say that's true. It's a mummy of a famous monk who lived at the beginning of the Christian era. Again, um, the giants living in historical times, the times of the Buddhists here, how far back the Buddhists go, some 5,000 years possibly, or whatever. Again, pockets of these large peoples living around seem to be, cohabitating and mingling with people of average size in their employ. Maybe they were lower in number in other places around the world. They were annihilated, exterminated. Again, recurring themes with that when they find the bones of these rather large scale remains found with people of normal size, immolated inside, caves and, underground, rock hewn, cities, etc. Those are recurring, including here again in the Asian countries. Those also were occurring again with the giant genocide, the time for the giants to go, the rebellions against the giants and by whomever, So there's all of this stuff going on in the past, folks, because it makes a lot of sense because the world was covered with these humanoid peoples from the past, big and small and short and stout and all sorts of weird configurations, etc., etc. The whole past of the humanoid races on this planet is just some unbelievable, fantastic story that's just incredible. And we're only seeing glimpses of it through these accounts, but at least we're taking a more rational, scientific look at these things and just asking a bunch of questions and maybe postulating a few things on our own. And based on these recurring themes going over and over again, what do they mean? This is interesting. Giants used as pillars to a great fortress. Giants buried alive beneath Tokyo Fort. Just a bit of sensationalism there. Giants buried alive beneath Tokyo Fort. The gruesome myth of the human pillar has been verified by unearthing of skeletons in the grounds of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. Workmen repairing the ancient citadel at the Nujibashi were horrified to uncover the skeletons of a number of giant men standing guard, 12 feet below the surface of the earth, to protect the fortification. The skeletons were taken as verification of the tradition of the quote unquote human pillar, a superstition of ancient Nippon. It was a custom, according to mythology, to sacrifice human beings upon beginning erection of a fortress. Living bodies of the strongest men of the nation were buried in the belief that their strength would be imparted to the building. News of the discovery was kept secret by the government, but leaked out when workmen who had found them repeated the tale. The skeletons were turned over to the Tokyo Imperial University for examination and burial. I don't like that at all. That's the kind of story I don't like to hear where the government takes control and they don't like the information going out. What are you keeping from us? Again, what is it about it? They just naturally programmed to respond in this way, withholding information from the human race about their past, etc. Are these humans? Are they some kind of, interdimensional non-human entities, evil entities from some other evil dimension or one that's similar to us, but just, bizarro world or something like that? Why is that? You think people would be inquisitive about these things, like, but that I'm talking about people, these other things are they people? I don't know. But this is from the Warsaw Daily Times, August 10th, 1925. So accounts in the 20th century were not going back to Victorian times. They always have all these excuses. The people who are the naysayers and the skeptics always have all these, knee-jerk answers to respond with all these things, and none of them wash at all. They suck, all their responses. They're not countering the argument here. They're just naysaying everything. It's no argument, no sort of intelligent argument about it. It's just dismiss it offhand because, in their heads they're thinking Jolly Green Giant and all this kind of, because that's what they've been pumped with, all the propaganda and Jack and the Beanstalk and everything else, which is really a true story about the giant genocide, time for the giant genocide, at least in the British Isles. That's what Jack and the Beanstalk story is about. Probably about, the giant genocide in the British Isles and Europe. Time for you to go, Giants, because, you know, That's how it is. Okay, so those were the accounts from Japan. I thought, just interesting. I'm sure there was more. I was just unable to cover them all because they haven't been all dug up, including that one. It's just a headline. Would have been interesting to see what they said about you know, those particular skeletal remains. But seems to be, again, these large skeletal remains being found in Japan is not free of that. Again, suggests of this worldwide population of humanoid creatures of all sorts living in the past, a completely different past, one you never heard about, one that sounds more like fantasy and less like truth, but that's because that's what you've been fed, you know, to dismiss these things as being myths and fables, etc., for a reason, you know. And that's where the whole "there be dragons." And you further back in time, when you hear about all these weird creatures from the Holocene, well, why shouldn't there be some mythology of this from the past? But it's not a myth based on real creatures that lived in the Holocene, that were large, that died off. Okay, so all these recent occurrences, like what would happen with the giants if they existed during the Holocene, and take everything we're saying here to be true, how long it would take for them to devolve, and then of course intermingle with other species of hominids, like I said in my previous video, all different way hybrid species coming out of these humanoids from the past who probably lived in a caste system of sorts when it was a more advanced civilization, and they were tinkering around with genetic engineering. Corn is the absolute example of it and evidence of it. Corn is. So let's take a look at these accounts in Malaysia, just to take on a couple of more locations and countries outside of Japan. But one of the reasons why I'm doing it is these giant footprints. Okay. And what I meant to say about these buried alive, this whole thing about these giants being buried alive, I don't think so, because we heard of accounts of the giant skeletal remains being buried in an upright and standing position in the Americas. Okay, so this is not, we shouldn't be taken as some unusual type of burial, despite whatever their legend says. Who knows? It's just a grain of truth exaggerated and put into forth in different terms. But we had all of these skeletal remains found in the Americas that were buried in the standing position. It's not an unusual thing to find these large skeletal remains around the world buried in these certain positions, sitting position, in buried in a wheel, etc. So just keep that in mind. And I also believe, and I don't know why I don't have it here, but I think there was also giant footprints in Japan to be found as well. Um, no, but we found them in China. I thought there was one article here that mentioned giant footprints in Japan, but maybe I'm mistaken. So, in any case, let's look at this one from Malaysia, because this is, again, it's a recurring theme, and the reason why I'm doing it is because just simply by looking at the videos on my channel here. Okay, so here I show a giant footprint in China from the last video that I did. If we go a little further down here, here's another giant footprint in Spain, Sardinia, Malta, one of those areas. I forget which one exactly. So another one of these giant footprints. Okay, go a little bit further down here, and here's a giant footprint in British Columbia. Okay, so what's going on here? Okay, and I had mentioned this before in one of my videos, that I don't think these giant footprints are just simply for the hell of it. Okay, that they represent and signify something. Okay, that maybe this is a signatory of some of these at least a part of the epic of the past of the large hominids of the giants, okay, that in a worldwide culture that was in contact with all the different areas on the planet, these people, it would signify, and it only makes sense, okay? It doesn't make sense that these people would do anything for no reason whatsoever, or to do something exactly the same as disparate peoples and different ancient cultures around. It doesn't seem to have a very high probability. And this thing seems to me to signify something, or to tell whoever, whomever, that this is who we are. And possibly this is to signify who they were, for anybody to know who they were. This was a unifying symbol for them. And, we Patagonia being called, big feet, right? And this is where the etymology, they're not sure where the etymology comes from, but it seems to mean big feet, all right? Why, why does this keep recurring in all these? And we've heard other accounts of large footprints over and over and over again, folks. I think this is, when mainstream academics are going to dismiss it as some just artwork naturally occurring, people doing it for frivolous reasons, whatever, doesn't seem highly probable to me, folks. This seems to be a symbol of something, a unifying symbol of these people who are rather large. And this is the show. The other humanoids that existed of the ancient past, this is who they were. Probably the ruling class, based on what we know about existing peoples, some cultures that exist in contemporary times, at least in the 20th century, and in the 2000s as well. Again, the chiefs of the Fiji Islands, okay? Here's the guy who's the chief from 1920 to 2004. It's not just one guy, you know. Okay, here's the guy who is the chief now, next to this 6 foot guy, okay, probably weighs like, 400 pounds, 7.7 foot, 7 inches tall. Okay, we're talking about Malaysia, and now we're going to move on to the Philippines here, okay. Are we getting a picture here, or just people are stuck, you know, with the baloney history that they learned in their textbooks? Large Malaysian skulls. Two giant skulls have been found among small people. The average modern skull is about 1,200 to 1,400 cc's cubic capacity. Malaysian people are kept in a state of physical immaturity. They appear as children. This state of physical immaturity is called neoteny. So when skulls are found, large Malaysian skulls, this is surprising according to failing models of current academics. The size is expected to show something other than the degenerative properties happening. Devolution, not evolution, is at work. Greater ancestry is proven globally, yet stating the king has no claws, or evolution hasn't happened. It's like trying to make a horse drink when it doesn't want to. Hopefully, more information will be brought out about these magnificent ancestors of the Malaysian people, okay? And here's where I think Chris has it slightly wrong, because the giants are still with us, okay, with the chiefs of the Fiji Islands, the Watusi people, the Frisian giants, they're still with us today, okay? They didn't completely devolve, all right? Chris is making a mistake of saying that these giant peoples are the same peoples as us, and they are not. They have a different strain of DNA. They can't possibly know the reasons for it. They hardly know the reasons why animals form from their DNA when they try to explain that. Okay, every embryo starts out the same and develops into these things, and how it tells these things they know what they're responsible for. They don't know how these phenomena occur. It's like a field generation machine, the DNA. And all that has to be taken into account when thinking about these things. So they didn't devolve. It probably, most likely, what happened, whereas they were, again, where they were completely killed off, exterminated, genocided, like the Galena people in Galena Canyon. These very sophisticated people who seemed more intelligent than the surrounding indigenous races that were with them there. Okay, more developed, more developed socially. Okay, if the big man of the Haudenosaunee Iroquois culture of the northeastern part of North America had the big man to pass it on the great law of peace, well, what were these rather large people really all about in the past? Don't seem very warlike to me, but capable of defending themselves, of course. By going around giving great laws of peace, and then us, the Americans, at least, the founding fathers, taking all their laws into consideration when forming their own documents, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, etc. It's mentioned, recognized by the government. Okay, that those things came directly from the big man. Okay, one of these giants who lived in the Americas. Okay, similar things, I'm sure, were going on in all these areas in the past. You had the giant humanoid type beings, the elongated skulls. You had the people of normal size, people of small stature, all these people living in these areas all around the world. Same dynamics going on, different castes, classes, etc. going on at some time in the past. And for many epics, all sorts of things we could, the stories could just go on forever because there's a whole history that we don't know anything about. Heroes and villains and everything else from the past is totally untold. And you could probably hear about with the last vestige of the thing if people bothered, but they don't want to because, giants don't exist. So, I guess it's a contemporary report from Malaysia. And here again, okay, this is Manila in the Philippines. Another footprint. Just all over the world, folks, just for shits and giggles. That's why people did it. Hey, buddy, what do you want to do today? Hey, let's make giant footprints. How are we going to do that? Oh, chisel them out and everything will fool everybody. Ha 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 ha. Okay, let's do that. We don't got anything better to do, like, gather food or wood or anything like that. Nah, none of that stuff. Let's just do this for no apparent reason. Yeah, okay. Sure, sure. Yeah, that's what mainstream academics are going to say. Oh, it's a certain kind of art. Oh, yeah, over and over again in totally different places all around the world. I think it's trying to say something. If you don't figure that, you're not a good anthropologist, I don't think. Okay? I think it would be like Anthropology 101, dopey. So, authorities are aiming to discover the mystery of a fossilized footprint found from the feet of an ancient giant in the remote, I don't know, come to Halagan, Kalinga. Provincial Tourism Officer Lorraine Alunde Nagao said that the mysterious footprint of the stone floor was found in what used to be the ancient community of ancient people, now located in the middle of the Pele farm. According to Nagawi, the person who owns the footprint is 15 feet, 15 centimeters tall. No, 15 feet. A few years ago, the bones of the ancient human and animal rhinoceros were discovered in the town of Rizal Kalinga, which is currently undergoing through thorough study by European scientists. Oh no, oh no, it's going through thorough study by European scientists. Oh, that's like the death sentence for these things. You're gonna disappear. That's what's gonna happen. You're gonna disappear, or. going to that, giant warehouse all boxed up somewhere, never to be found again, for their own future reference. So, again, this recurring theme of giant footprints, excuse me, I think it's to signify, at least in this time period that we may be talking about, of the giant humanoids, that signify this culture or this, society that was, worldwide. And this is where the possibility and probability exists that, all these worldwide cultures shared all this knowledge because you had one worldwide unified society with a totally different past, and possibly, and most definitely in my mind, so more advanced somewhere in that ancient past. When you have corn pollen found from 80,000 years ago, which was a report I read on this channel, okay, where corn is being, just an impossibility, the single greatest feat of genetic engineering ever, ever. Okay, it took place some 80,000 years ago with cavemen, doing this is so impossible and so ridiculous and preposterous that they even proposed this is nonsense of the first order. Okay, only a more advanced race of beings could possibly invent corn. There's no other possible way. No other. Just right there in your face. And they can't even think of a way to minimize it at this point because it's just impossible for them to. It's a conundrum. Complete conundrum. Okay? There's obvious evidence of a more advanced people genetically engineering living organisms in the past. And all these ancient myths and stories about people and other beings being created, okay, seems very real and very possible and seems very probable. Okay. When David Paulides did his big research on Bigfoot there and sent over 100 samples of Bigfoot hair and skin samples, and had, paid to have laboratory do this, in a white paper written on it by 4 different, professor PhDs, and nobody wants to look at it. Okay. That Bigfoot has human DNA in the DNA. At least part of it is human. Okay. It's not a northern ape and all that kind of stuff. That's the baloney story that you're handed, and a rabbit hole for you to go down. All right. David Paulides, who I trust, okay, he put his neck out there, stuck his neck out for this. Okay, it's human DNA. Who did that? Okay, and I say that these Bigfoot could have been used as workers, and somehow they overcame their inability. Maybe they don't have the vocal capacity, or mouth is not designed to speak words, but they're intelligent enough to communicate. And maybe one of the ways they figured out to communicate is by telepathy. It's possible. You always hear about these reports of UFO and Bigfoot somehow communicating with each other telepathically. Well, and I say UFOs are just creatures that live in space. Well, there's more fantastic story right there, folks, that you're only going to hear about on this channel. All right. So anyway, guys, that's the end of this. I wanted to cover Malaysia there and the Philippines and with Japan, okay, because there's recurring themes that are going on in these stories, in these accounts, whether it be large weapons of any variety, of any sort, okay, seem rather standardized in, with the sort of size of the people who might be handling these things. It just doesn't make any sense. You're gonna make yourself big in the afterlife. Boy, I would make something the size of whatever, like a redwood tree as my sphere. Why going to stick with a little 11-foot like harpoon or something like that? Or a 12-foot sword. Why am I going to stick with that? I just make bigger and bigger and bigger. So look, this that's one of their arguments that doesn't wash either. It's just a totally weak argument against all these things, and all their arguments against the giants and large hominids or anything else, small ones, or they don't. Only human beings are the most important person and people to think about from the past. Only Homo sapiens, and that's it, because that's all that ever existed. Okay. No, there's no xenophobia or ethnocentrism in our genes. No, sure there isn't. I guess for some of us there are, or the non-human entities, but us real players are not the NPCs that look to screw us up in our lives every day. We're the real players. Those people are just the NPCs or non-human entities. They have nothing to contribute to this society, to this world. Don't pay attention to their history channels or textbooks. There's nothing in there worth learning about. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed that. Please do hit the like button. It really helps the channel when you do hit the like button. So please do it if you support the channel and you support my work here. Please do hit the like button. And if you're not a subscriber, please do subscribe. We got some very interesting ideas to discuss on this channel that you're never going to hear anywhere else. Okay? All right, guys. Anyway, Bugcat7 signing out. Peace.